So I trained as a clinical psychologist and a clinical researcher. And that's actually a very different discipline than social psychology. And so social psychology is at the intersection, let's say, of sociology and psychology. It has to do, it focuses on the effect of group affiliation, let's say, on psychological processes. And it's a radically leftist subdiscipline. And I would say it's quite corrupt. And one of the ways I discovered that corruption was by beginning to investigate the technical structure of the belief system that makes up progressivism or left-wing thinking, especially left-wing authoritarianism. And as I delved into that, I learned, much to my shock, I would say, that there was an insistence among social psychologists and then everyone that was influenced by them that there was no such thing as left-wing authoritarianism, that authoritarianism in and of itself was only a conservative phenomena and a right-wing phenomenon. And I really couldn't understand that at all, because the evidence that there's left-wing authoritarianism, to call it compelling is to say almost nothing. I mean, you could make a very strong case, although it's a vicious battle, that left-wing authoritarianism has been responsible for more misery and death in the 20th century than right-wing authoritarianism. It's a rough contest, but when you have someone like Mao on your side on the left, it's difficult to defeat him on the brutality scale. And, social psychologists didn't begin to admit that there might be such a thing as left-wing authoritarianism literally till 2016. We did some of the first research in that area. So one of the things I'm wondering about is what, if you can pull yourself out of your conservative proclivity, let's say, and your role, at least in part as a lobbyist, what did you see when you were operating within the university system that indicated the danger of an academic system dominated not only by liberal individualists, let's say, but even more particularly by so-called progressivists? What did you see that doing to disciplines? Say, you could speak more particularly to history, for example.
Sure. Well, I'll start with an anecdote from the time when I was a young tenure track but still untenured professor, which and you understand the vulnerability I had, especially given how outspoken I was in this episode. But then I will also speak to something that has happened in my field, which is early American history, but in particular African American history. And for people who are listening to us, I'm decidedly a middle-aged bald white guy, which means that I could no longer, according to the powers that be in academia, be a specialist or an expert in African American history. But let me start with the aforementioned anecdote. This was about roughly 20 years ago. I forget the exact year, but President Reagan had recently passed away. And my colleagues in the history department decided, now remember, as I've mentioned a few minutes ago, they're all big libs. They decided they were going to host a symposium about Reagan's legacy, and they were going to spend some money to market this around our campus. And, prudence probably suggested that I just keep my mouth shut. But I just thought, while I don't think anyone's perfect, Reagan was a great but not a perfect president, there simply was not going to be a fair, objective assessment of his legacy as president of the United States. And so I talked to my other conservative friend, the other conservative in the College of Liberal Arts, who was an economist. And I said, well, let's go join this panel of 4 historians and let's offer a balanced opinion. Those 4 other faculty members had no reason to do anything other than proceed with their conversation. But because of the scheduled appearance of the 2 of us as conservatives, they canceled it. And they canceled it because, as you know well from your own experience, they can't stand the disagreement. And frankly, although they wouldn't admit it, I think they were fearful of the facts that we would bring to the table. And so that, if that anecdote's helpful, it's helpful in this way. That is just emblematic of everything that's wrong with university.